Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel, Girl Gone Crypto. I have a really exciting guest, Colin Cantrell of Nexus. So, Colin, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
You for having me.
So now I have to say that this is just really a huge honor because I think the work you guys are doing at Nexus is really quite extraordinary. And I also have to say that this is pretty exciting because I have actually gotten so many requests from my audience to have you on. And so, just to start out, can you give us an overview of what Nexus is and what you guys are up to over there?
Yeah, so I usually start with the definition of nexus, which means a connection or series of connections linking two or more things. That's why the project is called Nexus, because it's kind of a collection of, I guess, a lot of projects. So, I mean, the fundamental baseline of it is the cryptocurrency and the blockchain aspect. But we kind of combine together a lot of different things, such as, developing organic or certification standards, on the blockchain, or even developing our own alternative energy systems, alternative communication systems. So it's kind of a nexus of projects, I guess you can say, that are really just fundamentally based around the concept that Buckminster Fuller stated, that you don't change things by fighting the existing reality. You change things by making a new model that renders the existing model obsolete. And so, yeah, that's Nexus.
And so, what is it that you guys do?
So the I guess the most of what we do is in the actual blockchain space. So we have developed a new blockchain from scratch. We've been around since 2014, for those that don't know. And it's designed to essentially make smart contracts something that are, I guess, more usable for people. Right now, there's this kind of, I don't want to say blue sky, but it's very complex in order to utilize them. And a lot of the architecture that other blockchains use, like Ethereum or EOS, are actually using kind of language designs that are based off of more web rather than actual contract languages.
Mm.
So we've designed type of smart contract engine that actually is capable of scaling and does a lot of useful things, such as managing assets, decentralized exchange. I can enter into a contract between you if I, like, let's say, want to send an invoice, or I want to go through escrow, or I want to sell you my house, or things like that. So it's kind of an interactive smart contract system, I guess is the best way to say it. But also one that scales. I think our processing capabilities are 5,000 to 45,000 contracts per second is generally what we're seeing on the Tridiam protocol. And so that's kind of the first focus that we have, is let's take these smart contracts and make them something that people can actually look, touch, and feel. Right now, when you send a transaction with an Nexus wallet, it has a smart contract in there that allows you to actually reverse the transaction if it expires. So if you send to an invalid address or somebody's wrong address and they never claim it within the set expiration time, you're able to actually claim those funds back to yourself. So that helps kind of segueing into the second thing that we focus on is the usability for the end user, not just with the smart contracts, but for cryptocurrency as a whole. I've noticed a lot of drawbacks, especially helping non-technical people start their wallet. Dealing with a wallet.dat file, dealing with backups, having to manage all of those things. If you don't make, frequent enough backups, you could lose coins. If you send to an invalid address, the coins could be gone. So everybody usually sends the test transaction first, right? So we've developed what's called signature chains, which are a decentralized login system that essentially allows you from any computer to log in. And that's kind of designed to feel more like your online bank, because cryptocurrency is eventually going to replace the banking system. So we kind of believe that in order to reduce that learning curve for people, to make it something that's streamlined with what they're already used to. So that also adds other benefits to any other sort of application that wants to start enhancing their system with blockchain logic. They can essentially just use the blockchain login system on top of their existing login system and give people access to it without the user actually having to have any changes done, and without the keys actually having to be stored on the service. So we believe it definitely makes it a lot easier for people to use, and it makes it something that people are more used to. And all of the way around, I mean, it's essentially designed to help kind of bring cryptocurrency to the next level. Which is, essentially what the Tridium protocol is. And that's the first step of 3, which is called the Tau framework, which goes Tridium, Amine, and then Obsidian. And that essentially is unlocking our multidimensional chaining architecture, which essentially is our scalability solution that allows things to happen on chain without having to make any sacrifices of decentralization, because there's the blockchain trilemma, which Vitalik Buterin actually coined the term, which states that only two of three are able to exist in a blockchain system, and that's security, scalability, and decentralization. So generally, somebody will always, essentially take a loss on one of those three in order to have an effective blockchain system. But with our multidimensional chaining architecture, we believe that we have actually solved this trilemma in order to essentially scale the protocol in a decentralized way, while also allowing it to be secure. So that's some of the basic computational technology that we work on, but we also are focusing on satellite technology, which is essentially applying blockchain-like game theory incentive mechanisms into deployment of hardware, so that essentially just the same way as people build a blockchain, and they are rewarded for doing the same, you could do the same thing with mesh networks or satellites, so that essentially we can start developing our own communication protocols. And so the Nexus software is part of which will help aid in that, just as it aids in the development of the blockchain system itself.
So you guys have your hands in a few different buckets in a lot of different areas. And I kind of want to touch on something that you mentioned a second ago, because one of the things that I think most of us in the space can kind of agree on is that there's a really big learning curve when it comes to figuring out how to buy and sell and move around crypto. And like for someone coming into the space, learning how to use a hardware wallet is that still kind of like a nerdy thing that is, just not really intuitive. And so I think that the decentralized login system that you mentioned about creating a user experience that feels more like just logging into your normal bank account, but still has that security feature of the blockchain. Can you talk like a little bit more on that and how that works and what you guys are doing there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the first benefit of it is that you have a decentralized login system, but there's a lot of other benefits as far as security underneath the hood. One of them is actually quantum resistance. So we actually, using a SIG chain, you actually are resistant to quantum computers, which are coming out. And then another thing is that you essentially don't ever get bound to one specific key. So when you're dealing with UTXO or any legacy blockchain, your hardware wallet or your wallet.dat file is basically storing these private keys on your computer or on that actual device. And so what ends up happening is if that key is ever compromised or lost, your funds are completely gone. But with the SIG chain, we actually decouple the key from the account identity. So a SIG chain can have anything on it. I mean, you can create assets, you can create registers, you can have tokens, you can have token accounts. I mean, there's a lot of things so there's no limitation on a SIG chain of what you can do. But what it also does is it essentially, as I was saying, decouples this key from the identity, so that we're actually changing the private key every single transaction, which also gives you more assurance that it's going to be more secure, because the vulnerability period of that public key, even to a quantum computer, is around 5 seconds, rather than with Bitcoin or anything. Once you essentially make a transaction and spend an input or an output, what that public key is revealed, which means that, if you have a quantum computer, you're able to crack that. And then once that key is compromised, all of the funds in that address are compromised forever. In this way, think about the authentication of the private key, but with a static identifier. So you have an account identifier called a Genesis ID, and that account identifier never changes, and that's how you're actually able to prove your ownership. And then you have two ways to authenticate yourself. You have a next hash or a recovery hash. So the way it's working under the hood is we're actually taking your username and a password and a PIN, and we're running it through a special hashing function called Argon2, that's a memory hard password function, which basically means that the difficulty in generating that hash it's bound by your memory of your computer. So this way, if people have FPGAs or ASICs or these supercomputers essentially designed for cracking encryption, they won't have any advantage over a conventional laptop. And so that essentially gives us brute force resistance in a decentralized way, because when you're talking about a decentralized login system, if you attempt a password, more than 3 times, you can get locked out of the system in a centralized way. But there is no central authority that is deeming your credentials are valid or not. It's essentially you're in a contract with mathematics in a way. You're saying, the access to my SIG chain has to prove that I've created this public key. And you have to generate not only that hidden input, but you also generate a signature from that private key to authenticate yourself. So essentially, you're getting all of the benefits of the public key cryptography, but you're actually making it even more secure because you're never reusing a key more than once, and you're never revealing that key until you actually use it. And by the time you use that key, then you've already assigned your sigchain another key. So that key therefore becomes invalid once you essentially reveal it. So even with a quantum computer, you'd have a very difficult time actually cracking a sigchain. So your username and password and PIN, as I was saying, go through the Argon2 hashing function, which generate a 512-bit hash, which is then used as a secret to generate your new private key, which then generates the public key, and then you hash that public key, and that creates your authorization hash. So to log in, essentially what I'm doing is I'm typing in my username, password, and PIN. It runs through that special Argon2 hashing function and then generates the private key and then generates the public key. And then I authenticate that data and I hash that public key and make sure that it is equivalent to my next hash, right, which is my authorization hash. And that's your general login system. That's essentially how you're able to log in and also change your password or PIN at any time. And then the second way is with a recovery system that we developed, and that's a separate type of hash that is independent of the password. So if you forget your username or password or PIN at any time, you're able to actually recover your account, even if that account was hacked. So having your account hacked would essentially be the same as having a private key compromised in any legacy protocol. In this sense, you're able to actually still recover your account and prevent any damages and lock somebody out that may have had access to that. So you get a higher level of security in that way, and you get kind of the more natural, I guess, utilities that are involved if you forget a password. Generally, you have to go and have your password reset, but if there's no central authority to do that, the only way to do that is through mathematics, right? So it's been very challenging, but very fun at the same time to kind of integrate these different technologies together to create something that feels like what we're already using, but actually having it function in a completely decentralized manner. So that's essentially how the sigchain architecture works. And then the other useful component of it is that we're not, since your account isn't bound to any specific key anymore, it's only bound to the last key that you've generated. You can change your keys at any time, which means if I want to upgrade my key, we allow the option for you to actually use post-quantum cryptography now if you're extra paranoid. Using what's called Falcon, which is fast Fourier lattice-based compact signatures over NTRU, which is, it's just a complex name of, saying that this has no known attacks from quantum computers. So that's another really useful thing too, is that at any time you can change your key. With Bitcoin, unfortunately, once you have that address is bound to that key for all time. If the key's ever compromised, it's gone. You can't ever change that key. So that means if any Bitcoin keys become vulnerable to quantum computers, well, not if, when they become vulnerable to quantum computers, then you're pretty much SOL, which is a big problem because the quantum resistance problem is not necessarily, how should I say it? There's a lot of assumptions that you can prevent it from happening or putting preventative measures in. But since all of this is baked into the Bitcoin protocol and all of these keys are actually already existing and already used, you'd have to essentially change or transfer all of these coins out of these old addresses into these new addresses to get quantum resistance. And a lot of Satoshi's actual coins are still held in open public keys. So when quantum computers come out, even these old coins that have never moved may start moving, which is going to be a big problem. And I think the general consensus is that, when that problem comes to present itself, that's when we deal with it. But we take the stance of, that may not be the best option. We should probably take as many preventative measures now to prevent against that as we possibly can. So the combination of using that post-quantum cryptography and also simply hiding your public key until it's actually used, even if you were using, let's say, the brain pool key, you actually wouldn't be able to hijack somebody's sigchain even with a quantum computer because you have a less than 5-second window to actually try to crack that transaction because the transaction will propagate to the network within 3 seconds. So you have to try to crack that public key, then re-sign it, and then create a new key, and then a new transaction that's a conflicting transaction with that one in less than 5 seconds. But even then, the cool part about it is our system actually, basically, when it goes into a conflict resolution, it detects something that was received first as the most valid. It doesn't necessarily negate the other one from being accepted in a block, but if a block is created with a conflicted transaction, that block actually won't be relayed either. So there's a lot of other preventative measures even deeper into it with that specific component. So yeah, that's SigChain in a nutshell. They provide all of these things, and they also provide a foundation for developing digital identities through also developing trust, because we have a kind of trust-based consensus where not everybody has money, but everybody has time. So you actually earn a Nexus valuation based on your time you contribute to the network and an equivalent value of everybody else. So that essentially what we're doing is we're actually taking new time and giving new money to new time, right? The problem with the world right now is new time is bought by old money, and money doesn't age, right? So when we're doing cryptocurrencies, now we're actually able to start giving people's time back to themselves, and the new money or crypto is what is buying that new time. And you're also rewarded for having that trust too, by securing the network. So that builds us a really cool kind of like elevation in the internet, because right now the internet's just anybody could be anybody, and we have no idea who's who. You could maybe talk to somebody's username, but you don't necessarily always know that is who you're talking to. You have hacking, spoofing. It's just the internet wasn't really designed with security in mind. It's just designed to work. And so there's a lot of these centralized authorities and other things like that that are kind of helping bridge that. But now when you add this ledger over the internet and you add trust and you have SigChains, right? Then you have an elevated level of trust on the internet, so that eventually I see, you have login with Google or a login with Facebook. There most likely in the future be a login with Nexus button, where essentially you can actually use your Nexus SigChain as an authentication system for other services. And then you can carry that around with you. And you also know that account is not regulated by any central authority. You actually have complete control and autonomy over your own data and your own account. And that can also be used as an authentication system for existing web services. So it kind of fits together really well with everything, but it also allows extensibility, such as using biometrics for your username generation, your fingerprint, things like that can help continually improve that, so that essentially it just becomes something that we're already used to, but it I guess builds on the security models of that, and it also builds the autonomy for users. So yeah, that's basically it in a nutshell.
And so what you were just talking about with kind of creating or making the internet more secure, is that something that kind of layers on top of the internet, or is that a completely separate system, or how do you see that integration happening?
Very good question. So the internet's built on a stack. Okay, it's called the OSI, which stands for Open Systems Interconnection. And this stack is essentially what they've used to standardize all of the existing web technology. So that's composed of 7 layers. The bottommost layer is the network layer. Then the next, I'm thinking Nexus stack. Bottommost layer is your physical layer. Then the next layer is your data link layer. And then the next layer is your network. And then your transports, and then session, and then presentation and application. So all 7 of those layers essentially drive every single web application that you do. So we've developed a stack too called the Tridiam software stack. And ours is 7 layers as well, but they kind of interweave into the OSI. Instead of it sitting on top of the OSI like this, it kind of is adding sub items inside each one of these items. So one could say that it's 14 layers stack or whatever, but it's really kind of just something that it fits together with the existing OSI. And our stack essentially goes network, then ledger, then register, then operation, and then API and logical and interface. So essentially this technology, or the ledger, can actually interweave with the existing internet. And then when we use something called the locator identity separation protocol on the network layer, what we do is, as I was saying earlier, you have your Genesis ID, which becomes your account identifier. So your keys are decoupled from that. Now imagine that this identifier also becomes your IP address, but it's an IP address that can follow you everywhere in the world, right? And what you're doing is you're decoupling not only the identity, right, the identifier, from the location, because your IP address as it exists now is essentially a locator. It's saying, okay, you're in this network in this place. That's how you can trace somebody by their IP address. So when you're roaming between these networks, you're essentially going to be roaming over different RLOCs, and you'll essentially be able to be logged in on your Nexus account on your phone, but that'll give you access to your EID that is static and does not change. So That's your first step, right? Because any web service that's receiving any sort of request from anybody, they're usually always logging the IP addresses. They're running them against possible whitelists or blacklists and all those types of things. But then again, you don't ever really know. Somebody can source a packet from another address and it looks like they're coming from that address, but they just never receive the reply. So you have your account identifier, you log in, and that gives you your EID, which is your routing or your network level identity. And then you also have a ledger level identity that comes with your trust. So that when any web service or anybody is pinging my web service and I'm running this locator identity separation protocol, obviously talking to Nexus as well, then I will be able to identify and look up this user's trust, the time they've been around, what other services they've gone to, if they've ever had any, attempts against me or any of these types of things, so that essentially now this IP address doesn't become this ephemeral, this could be anybody, this is a specific individual. And then when I was talking about the login with Nexus, right, with the SIG chain, you're able to generate the key that allows you to sign for your new RLOs, right, which allows you to roam and have that static IP address that's associated with your account and that's unique to you. That means I can go to another web service that supports login with Nexus, and just by having access and using my EID, that specific EID that is located in my SIG chain, I can be authenticated. And then I don't even have to log in on that service because they can authenticate me directly by my IP address, because my IP address can never change because it's bound specifically to my online identity, which is my SIG chain, right?
Wow.
So it adds this really cool kind of layer of trust on the internet that essentially removes our need for these third parties. So it gives, I guess, more transparency too. I mean, where right now you have to go to a, I don't know if you've ever set up an SSL certificate, but you have to go and, pay Symantec to, sign the certificate for you and then say that they did their due diligence to verify you are who you are. And that's because cryptography doesn't necessarily identify people. You have to have some sort of proof that, hey, this public key belongs to this person that we've already identified. Since the SIG chain is essentially a type of identification system, a pseudo-anonymous, I should say, though, because just because you are contacting me with your SIG chain doesn't mean that I know it's you, right? It's just looks like a alphanumeric series of letters and numbers. Then you tie this identifier with your also keys, and then it acts essentially kind of like a public key database, where you don't even need these certificate authorities anymore, and you can identify somebody with the cryptography because the public keys associated with those accounts are published on the ledger in a decentralized way that cannot be manipulated, right? And then you take it a step further and say, let's say I create a web service and I put the web service as a SIG chain, and then I use the TNS system, which is Tau name system, and I own, let's say, test.nexus.io, and I create a SIG chain, let's just say the username that owns test.nexus.io. Then you can authenticate not only the web service's domain ownership through the blockchain, but you can also verify the content on that website. So if they have copyrightable material, that copyrighted material can actually be watermarked, and that watermark contains a hash that contains a register address of something that SIG chain owns, and I can verify the ownership of digital content on the website. Just the same way that when you go to a website and it says this web page is unsafe, this is a self-signed certificate. I imagine the web in the future, when SafeNet becomes more and more used, being a type of warning. Hey, this website has essentially the content on this website has no owner, or something like that, or these assets don't have any owners that are verified, copyrighted material, or et cetera, et cetera. And then you can also make sure you don't get viruses, because in that metadata for that specific piece of content that has ownership and the licensing and all of that, you also have a checksum of the actual image that you're downloading, so that even a hacker accessing somebody's web service and hacking into their server and trying to replace anything with different assets or different files, they're not going to be able to, because everybody's going to start choking and saying, oh, well, hey, this file was tampered with, because I can see the file was tampered with because I just look up the service's SIG chain and they're telling me that the checksum of this file is this, and it shouldn't be. So it'll be a lot easier for people to detect people manipulating web services, hacking web services. So that kind of all fully formulates into what I call the SafeNet. And I imagine this type of technology being something that really is going to be fundamental in driving that. And it takes the internet out of this Um, I mean, the internet, it's very polarized. It's dark and light. But I mean, I consider the internet right now mostly pretty dark. I mean, you don't know who's who. There's random IP addresses, anonymous people. I mean, one person can be 100 people if they want to be, right? And this kind of brings it, I guess, more into the light where you can start to say, okay, well, I can talk to you directly because I know, and I can look up your account. And then the other cool thing with the locator identity separation protocol is it also allows you to be accessible by your EID at any time without the need for a central routing server. So I can actually open a direct peer-to-peer connection with you if I want to make a phone call to you, just by knowing your username, right? I could call you by your username if you have voice over IP that essentially is using that EID, right? So, I mean, there's so many really, really, really cool things that you can kind of build together in this. And it's at least what we envision blockchain doing for the internet, because I believe that the internet has been missing this piece. This is a huge missing component of the internet to make it a safer place. And, I'm not necessarily sure. I've seen some people talk about, the trusted layer on the internet and the trust and blah, blah, but from what I've looked technically, most people haven't really tackled it in a way that covers all layers, all levels of it. They'll just drop something in and say, oh, hey, it works, or, have the idea that I could use a blockchain for all these things, but not necessarily with the technology to actually deliver it there.
So what would actual adoption of the SafeNet look like? Would it, how would someone start using it? Would it be people personally opting in to have a Nexus login, or what does this actually look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's uncertain to me now exactly how it's going to emerge, but I imagine, further down the road, essentially web services are going to start adopting this new type of protocol. Essentially, having their web service become a quote unquote safe web service, and then you're going to have some form of adoption from web browsers that are going to have to basically link into this and start utilizing the Nexus blockchain or whatever blockchain for the verification of some of these services. And then people, it's just going to start with, I'm using my basic account for my Nexus and I'm transferring, sending, receiving. And then there's another dApp that pops up and I can start using that. There's maybe new web services, companies that start adopting it, that start adopting SIG chain architecture. So yeah, I imagine it kind of in the SafeNet, it's going to require users essentially to demand it. And it's going to require web browsers to support it. Where it eventually becomes the norm, and unsafe type of web services are not. So it'll obviously have to prove its value in a lot of different areas. And I mean, talking to some people that I have where I said you can't spoof IP addresses anymore with this system, they just go, like, what? So I mean, I think there's a lot of promise of seeing a lot of this adoption. I mean, just simply a merchant that has issues with people, doing chargebacks or fraudulent activity, or, spoofing IP addresses or hacking. I mean, all these types of things I think are the low-hanging fruits where it can really start. When you can start to identify these people a lot more and you put that requirement upon them, then they're going to have less ability to wiggle in because they're going to have less shadows to hide behind, right? And it's going to make services safer. So businesses are going to naturally just start adopting that because they're going to mitigate their risk, and it's going to be cheaper for them to operate overall because they'll have less fraud.
Yeah. So one thing that I want to circle back to that we talked about earlier in the conversation real quick, because I think it's so huge and I want to make sure that people watching this didn't miss that, is that when you were talking about the login system and how your private keys, you would be generated every time. Honestly, I think that some of the biggest barriers to entry in the crypto market, some of the biggest pain points are this, the whole, if you don't own your keys, you don't own your coins, right? And it's scary to people getting in that there's no customer service line, there's no account recovery, that there's all of this kind of fear around losing their money. And the fact that you guys are working on both of those to where you don't have that issue of losing your key, and there is actually an account recovery process, and it's more secure. It's more user-friendly, more secure, kind of a win-win. So let's say that Like, what does a kind of adoption of that look like? Let's say a legacy chain like Litecoin or something is like, oh, that looks good. I wish we had that. Like, is there a way for current chains to integrate with this new
Yes, so
technology?
this is the beauty of it. So we just launched and activated the Tridium protocol on 11/11 this year. So it's about a month in now. And I guess are you familiar with the Ethereum 2.0 upgrade process? They're essentially building a completely new blockchain, and you'll have
I've
to
been hearing
somehow.
about it, yeah.
Yeah, so they're kind of going the easier route, which is, let's just build a totally new blockchain, and yeah, of course it's easier because you don't have to deal with all the legacy stuff. But we didn't. We actually spent a lot more time making it interoperate with UTXO or legacy type systems. So you can actually still use private keys and wallet.dats on Nexus if you want, if you're one of those types of people. But it interoperates with those, and it also upgraded the entire legacy blockchain into the Tridium blockchain. So essentially, we upgraded to a completely new blockchain architecture over the existing old architecture, which means that there's an upgrade path for anybody. And we did that partially for that, so that anybody that sees this technology and says, hey, I want to upgrade to not only SIG chains for the fact that it's SIG chains, but I want smart contracts and all this other stuff. Yeah, they can definitely upgrade. I mean, it's not going to be a like one for one, because
Yeah.
Nexus, even on the legacy blockchain, is still really, really, really different than any type of Bitcoin variant. It still has remnants of some of the same architecture of UTXOs, but it's still pretty different. So yeah, they could definitely do that, or even using some of the tech. So like what we got it from, the QT wallet, which I'm sure you're familiar with using all those old QTs, right? If you've used any altcoins,
Oh, yeah.
the old, ugly little wallet, called QT and whatever. So it used to take us about 30 days to synchronize with the network. We have about 3 million blocks on the network. It's been around since 2014. Now guess what the performance is now with Tridium, syncing from block 0. Guess how long it took?
So it used to take you 30 days.
Hmm? Now guess.
I don't know. Do you have it like down to a day?
17 and a half minutes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it took so long to get it to be able to do that, just because I had to do so much architectural work under the hood. But the reason I said that is because Tridium is not, you don't have to always just upgrade the Tridium protocol if you want all the Tridium. So you can actually still run a Tridium node, obviously, if you modify it to fit with your consensus rules of your altcoin, and gain, those benefits of the Tridium protocol too. I don't know if you've seen all the old QT wallets. What's the usual startup time? Like 30 seconds to a minute for the wallet to turn on and come up, right?
It sounds about right. Somewhere in there.
Yeah, so we got ours to less than a second, step-second boot up time too.
Wow.
No matter how big the blockchain is, because we fundamentally went through and, we originally were based off of the Bitcoin code from about 2012, and basically went through it all and fixed it and changed some of the architecture on it, still maintaining some of the original consensus code, obviously. And that's why we get such incredible performance. So it's not just something that if you need new features, you could use. You can actually use the Nexus software as it stands and make it work over your existing blockchain, which could be for Bitcoin too, or any other type of core. So, we designed a lot of our software to be used by other people. We're not the type of people that are just like, oh, hey, we're going to take this and say it's ours and say it's okay because it's open source or whatever, or we're going to keep ours closed source so that we keep other people from using it. No, we want to really contribute to the rest of the industry. And this technology itself can be used, including the database that I wrote from scratch, just because the embedded database system that they use, called LevelDB by Google, has some issues with scaling, and it wasn't really designed for blockchain applications. So yeah, all aspects of this code can be used for other projects that see value in it, including Litecoin, Bitcoin, and that's kind of part of our plan. Anyways, that if these legacy blockchains start to realize that their scaling limitations become such a big deal, then they can run the Tau framework over it, which they'll start with Tridium, and then they'll have to upgrade it to Amine, and then upgrade it to Obsidian. And we did it in 3 parts because it's a massive architectural overhaul, and it all has to be done on the live network. So you want to stagger it. You want to do it bit by bit. You don't want to change too much at once, otherwise yeah, big problems happen. So it's an upgrade path for any other blockchain, including Bitcoin. If they decide that, you know, the Lightning Network isn't working out the way that they wanted to, and they say, oh well, hey, Nexus has the 3DC, they could upgrade the Bitcoin blockchain to use the 3DC if they want as well. So.
Well, Colin, I feel like we could probably keep talking for hours, but thank you so much for thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to come on and hang out and chat with me. So do you have is there any final words you have for the people listening before we go?
Yeah, I'll just say what I've usually been saying. Do not forget why we are here. We are not here to make money. We are here to change things. It is not about the money. The money is only a means to that end. So do not forget why we're here and why Satoshi created Bitcoin, because the world needs this. The world needs the freedom. I mean, it's so far beyond just like our luxuries right now. I mean, the world needs it. And the world needs more people to see that and to hold that space for the entire industry, because I've seen a lot of people maybe get stuck in the money, and a lot of projects that have just essentially become the same thing that we created crypto away from. So yeah, just don't ever forget that. And you too, if you can, spread the word, like keep true to the roots of crypto, because crypto needs it. It needs that. That's really what's going to bring the change.
Awesome. Well, Colin, thank you again so much for coming on. If people want to find you online and connect with you, where's the best place for them to find you?
Nexus.io, nexus.io. You can find just about anything there. On the footer, that'll have all our different social channels, Slack, Telegram, or forum. Come join the forum too. We just set up a forum. So yeah, come help give us some love too as well. It's forum.nexus.io.
Perfect. Well, there you guys have it. Thank you again so much, Colin.
Thank you.